The deafening crack of a Colt revolver split the dawn air as Elijah Parker's bullet found its mark, sending the coyote that had been stalking his cattle scurrying back into the scrubland. It was another hot June morning in 1878 Wickenburg, Arizona, where the desert promised no mercy to those who weren't ready for its harsh embrace. Elijah wiped sweat from his brow, unaware that before the month was out, he would find something far more valuable than his livestock. He would find her. Pearl Emerson stepped off the dusty stagecoach with trepidation, her gloved hands clutching a small carpet bag containing everything she owned in the world. She kept her head low, wide-brimmed hat shadowing her face from curious onlookers, as she made her way to Widow Jenkins' boarding house on the edge of town. The widow had responded to her letter seeking employment, offering room and board in exchange for help with cooking and cleaning for the miners and cowboys who paid for meals. "You must be Miss Emerson," Widow Jenkins called from the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a stout woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Welcome to Wickenburg. You're just in time to help with supper." Pearl nodded without raising her face. "Yes, madam, thank you for the opportunity." "Well, don't just stand there, child. Come in and I'll show you to your room. You can get settled and then help me in the kitchen." The widow's eyes lingered on Pearl's downturned face, but she asked no questions. That evening, Pearl worked in the kitchen, careful to keep her back to the dining room where a dozen men loudly recounted tales of their day's work in the nearby mines or out on the range. Her fingers worked deftly, chopping vegetables and kneading bread dough, as she had learned to do in her parents' home before the fever took them both last winter. "Girl, take this out to table 3, Widow Jenkins instructed, handing Pearl a tray laden with steaming plates of beef stew and fresh bread. "I'd rather stay in the kitchen," Pearl whispered. "Nonsense. I hired you to help, not to hide. Now go on." With trembling hands, Pearl took the tray and pushed through the swinging door into the dining room. She kept her eyes on the wooden floor, placing the plates before the hungry men without looking up. "Thank you, miss," a deep voice said, the words wrapped in a southern drawl. Pearl nodded and turned to leave, but a hand caught her wrist gently. She froze. "Might I trouble you for some salt?" the same voice asked. Pearl reached for the salt cellar on the next table, still refusing to lift her face, but when she turned back, she found the man standing. He was tall, with shoulders broad enough to suggest years of hard labor. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but there was a neatness to him that distinguished him from the other cowhands. "I'm Elijah Parker," he said, tipping his hat. "New to these parts. Just bought the old Hendricks place north of town." Pearl mumbled something unintelligible and pushed the salt cellar into his hand before fleeing back to the kitchen, her heart pounding. In her haste, her hat caught on the door frame and slipped, exposing her face for just a moment before she yanked it back into place. But a moment was enough. She heard the whispers start, saw the sideways glances. Her cheeks burned with shame. For the next week, Pearl did her best to avoid the dining room during meal times, but Widow Jenkins was having none of it. "You can't hide forever," the widow told her firmly one morning. "Whatever you're running from, it follows you like a shadow. Best to face it head on." That evening, as Pearl served dinner, she noticed Elijah Parker watching her from his usual corner table. He had come every night that week, always polite, always trying to engage her in conversation, and always met with her silence. "Miss Emerson," he called as she passed. "Might I have a word?" Pearl paused, clutching her serving tray like a shield. "I'm working, Mr. Parker." "I know, but I was hoping you might join me for a walk tomorrow. It's my day off, and I thought you might like to see the river. It's mighty pretty this time of year." The dining room had gone quiet, all eyes on them. Pearl felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up her neck. "Why would you want to walk with me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Elijah's eyes, warm and brown as fresh tilled soil, held her steadily. "Because I'd like to know you better." "You don't know what you're asking," Pearl whispered, feeling tears threaten. "I'm asking for the pleasure of your company, nothing more." Pearl shook her head and fled to the kitchen, ignoring Widow Jenkins' questioning glance. That night, she cried into her pillow, hating the scars that marred her once pretty face, hating the disease that had taken not only her beauty but her hopes for a normal life. The next morning, Pearl was surprised to find Elijah waiting on the porch when she went out to hang the laundry. "I won't take no for an answer, Miss Emerson," he said, standing and offering his arm. "Just a short walk." Pearl glanced back at the house, but Widow Jenkins was watching from the window with a look that suggested she approved of this development. "Fine," Pearl conceded. "A short walk." They strolled in silence for a while, the morning sun warming the desert around them. Wickenburg was still a young town, with more saloons than churches, but it had a certain rugged charm. The Hasseamper River flowed nearby, a lifeline in the arid landscape. "Why did you come to Wickenburg?" Elijah asked at last. Pearl kept her eyes on the path. "My parents died. I needed work." "I'm sorry for your loss." His voice held genuine sympathy. "I lost my ma when I was 12. Pa lasted another 10 years, but the ranch in Texas went to my older brother. I came west to make my own way." "And now you have the Hendricks place." Elijah nodded. "It's not much yet, but I've got plans. Good water, decent grazing land. Could be something real fine with some work." They reached the river, where cottonwood trees provided welcome shade. Pearl stood at the water's edge, watching the current flow over smooth stones. "Why do you hide your face, Miss Emerson?" Elijah asked quietly. Pearl stiffened. "I don't wish to frighten children or spoil anyone's appetite." "I've seen your face," he said gently. "When your hat slipped that first night." Pearl turned to him then, anger giving her courage. She reached up and removed her hat, tilting her face to the sunlight so he could see every pockmark, every crater and discoloration that the smallpox had left in its wake. "Is this what you wanted to see, Mr. Parker? Are you satisfied now?" Instead of revulsion or pity, Elijah's expression remained unchanged, warm, curious, interested. "I see a strong woman who survived something that kills many." Pearl's eyes filled with tears. "I survived, but at what cost?" "I was engaged to be married before the pox came. He couldn't even look at me afterward." "Then he wasn't worthy of you." Pearl laughed bitterly. "No one wants a wife who looks like this. You'd be surprised what matters to a man who's lived alone on the frontier," Elijah said. "Beauty fades, Miss Emerson. Character endures." "Pretty words, Mr. Parker, but we both know the truth. No one will ever," she broke off, unable to finish. Elijah stepped closer. "May I call on you properly? Sunday after church?" Pearl stared at him in disbelief. "Why? Is this some kind of cruel joke?" "No joke." His eyes held hers. "I admire courage, Miss Emerson, and you have that in spades." Pearl looked away. "I'll think about it." That was how it began. Elijah called on Pearl every Sunday after church, walking with her along the river or sitting on Widow Jenkins' porch, talking about everything and nothing. Pearl found herself looking forward to their time together, even as she tried to guard her heart against hope. One scorching July afternoon, Elijah invited Pearl to visit his ranch. "I've fixed up the house some," he said. "I'd value your opinion." Widow Jenkins insisted on chaperoning, which Pearl found both embarrassing and endearing. They rode in Elijah's wagon, the older woman between them on the seat, fanning herself vigorously against the heat. The Hendricks place, or the Triple P Ranch as Elijah had renamed it, was indeed modest, but Pearl could see the care that had gone into it. The small adobe house had been freshly whitewashed. New curtains hung in the windows, and a garden had been started, though the plants struggled against the relentless sun. "It's not much," Elijah said as he helped Pearl down from the wagon, "but it's mine." "It's wonderful," Pearl replied honestly, and it was not for its grandeur but for what it represented. Independence, hard work, dreams taking shape. Inside, the house was simple but clean, with a kitchen, a small parlor, and 2 bedrooms. Elijah had built most of the furniture himself, sturdy pieces that spoke of functionality rather than beauty. "My foreman, Daniel, lives in the bunkhouse with the other hands," Elijah explained. "We're a small operation now, just 5 of us working the cattle, but I'm hoping to expand." Widow Jenkins busied herself examining the kitchen while Pearl stood in the center of the parlor, trying to imagine living in such a place. It was a dangerous thought, one that brought both longing and fear. "What do you think?" Elijah asked, coming to stand beside her. "It's a good home," Pearl said softly. "You should be proud." "It needs a woman's touch," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. Pearl looked away. "I'm sure you'll find someone suitable." Elijah's laugh was warm. "I already have, if she'll have me." Before Pearl could respond, Widow Jenkins called from the kitchen, asking about coffee, and the moment passed. On the ride back to town, Pearl was quieter than usual, lost in thoughts she dared not voice. Elijah's words had stirred something in her that she had thought long dead: hope. August brought even more blistering heat to Wickenburg, and with it came trouble. A gang of cattle rustlers had been working the area, hitting several ranches in the territory. When they targeted the Triple P, stealing 30 head of Elijah's best cattle, he rode into town with fire in his eyes. "I'm forming a posse," he announced in the dining room. "These thieves have gone unchecked long enough." Several men volunteered immediately, eager for action and justice. Pearl watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart constricting with fear. Before he left, Elijah sought her out. "I'll be back," he promised. "Be careful," Pearl whispered, allowing him to take her hand briefly. "I have something to come back for," he said, his eyes holding a promise that made her breath catch. 5 days passed with no word. Pearl moved through her duties like a sleepwalker, starting at every sound that might herald news. On the 6th day, just as she was losing hope, the posse returned. Pearl was sweeping the porch when they rode in, a ragged line of exhausted men. Her eyes searched frantically for Elijah and found him at the rear, leading a horse with a body draped across its saddle. "Rustlers put up a fight," one of the men explained to the gathering crowd. "Got most of the cattle back, but Cooper took a bullet." Pearl's relief at seeing Elijah alive warred with sorrow for the dead man. She watched as they carried Cooper's body to the undertaker, then turned to find Elijah standing before her. His face was sunburned and stubbled, his clothes filthy from days on the trail. There was a haunted look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You're hurt," Pearl said, noticing the blood-stained bandage on his arm. "It's nothing. Bullet grazed me." Pearl hesitated only a moment before taking his good arm. "Come inside, I'll clean it properly." In the kitchen, Pearl worked silently, removing the dirty bandage and bathing the wound. It wasn't deep, but it had festered slightly in the heat. "This will sting," she warned, applying whiskey as antiseptic. Elijah hissed but didn't pull away. "Worth it for the attention," he said with a weak attempt at his usual charm. Pearl's hand stilled. "Don't joke, you could have been killed." "I know." Elijah's voice sobered. "Cooper was riding where I should have been, could just as easily have been me. And yet you'll do it again, won't you? Risk your life, if necessary. A man protects what's his." Pearl resumed bandaging his arm, her movements precise. "There are other ways to live, safer ways." "Not for me." Elijah caught her hand. Pearl, life out here is hard, always will be, but it's the life I chose and I wouldn't trade it. Pearl met his eyes. Even knowing the risks, especially knowing them, makes what's worth having all the clearer. She withdrew her hand gently. You should rest. Widow Jenkins will have a room ready. Elijah stood, towering over her in the small kitchen. Pearl, not now, she interrupted. When you're healed, then we can talk. September brought cooler evenings and the promise of autumn. Elijah's wound healed cleanly and he returned to his ranch, but he still came to town every Sunday to see Pearl. Their walks grew longer, their conversations deeper. Pearl found herself telling him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her parents and the life she'd had before smallpox changed everything. Elijah spoke of his dreams for the ranch, of the cattle empire he hoped to build, of the legacy he wanted to leave. I turned 30 next month, he told her one evening as they sat on the bank of the Hassayampa. Never thought I'd make it this far without putting down roots. What changed? Pearl asked, though she feared she knew the answer. Found something worth staying for. Elijah's hand found hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Someone. Pearl shook her head. Elijah, you don't want me, not really. Don't tell me what I want, woman, he said firmly. I've lived long enough to know my own mind. Look at me, Pearl insisted, turning her face fully to him in the fading light. Really look. This is what you'd wake up to every morning. These scars won't fade. They'll be there when I'm old and gray. Elijah studied her face, his expression serious. Then, with deliberate care, he reached out and traced one of the deeper scars along her cheek. This one, he said softly, tells me you're stronger than whatever tried to take you. And this one, his finger moved to another near her jaw. This one says you don't give up easily. Tears welled in Pearl's eyes. Stop. But Elijah continued, his touch feather light as it moved across her features. These aren't just scars, Pearl, they're stories. Your story. And I want to be part of it if you'll let me. I can't give you children, Pearl whispered, voicing her deepest fear. The doctor had told her the fever had likely rendered her barren. We don't know that for certain, Elijah replied. But if it's true, there are plenty of orphans who need homes. We could give them one. Pearl stared at him in wonder. You've thought about this. I've thought about little else since the day I met you. On October 12, 1878, Elijah Parker turned 30. Pearl baked him a cake, a simple affair with vanilla frosting that caused a stir among the boarding house guests who had never seen such a luxury in Wickenburg. That evening, after the other boarders had retired, Elijah and Pearl sat alone on the porch swing. The night was cool enough for Pearl to wear a shawl, and the stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky. Thank you for the cake, Elijah said. No one celebrated my birthday since Ma died. Pearl smiled, a gesture that had become more natural with him. Everyone deserves to be celebrated, Pearl. Elijah's voice took on a serious tone. I have something to ask you and I want you to think carefully before answering. Her heart began to pound. All right. Elijah took her hands in his. I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day when you wouldn't look at me. I want to marry you, to build a life with you at the Triple P. Will you have me? Pearl's eyes filled with tears. Elijah, are you sure? Truly sure? Never been more certain of anything in my life. Then yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding was held in November, a small affair at Wickenburg's only church. Pearl wore a dress of pale blue that Widow Jenkins had helped her make, and Elijah wore a new suit ordered from a catalog. The entire town turned out, some out of genuine goodwill, others out of curiosity. You may kiss the bride, the minister said, and Elijah lifted Pearl's veil. There, before everyone, he kissed her without hesitation or shame, and Pearl felt decades of insecurity begin to crumble. Their first night at the Triple P as husband and wife, Pearl was nervous. She had extinguished the lamp, unwilling to let Elijah see her body in the light, but he relit it. "I want to see my wife," he said gently. "Elijah, please, trust me, Pearl." Trembling, Pearl allowed him to remove her nightgown. The smallpox had left its mark on her body as well, scattered scars across her chest, arms, and back. She closed her eyes, unable to watch his reaction. But Elijah surprised her. He began at her shoulder, pressing his lips to a cluster of scars there. "This one," he murmured, "is for courage." His mouth moved to another on her collarbone. "This one is for endurance." And so he continued, moving across her body, kissing each mark and giving it meaning beyond pain and illness. When he finally claimed her lips, Pearl was weeping, not from shame but from a profound sense of acceptance she had never thought possible. "I love you," Elijah whispered against her mouth. "Every part of you." "I love you too," Pearl replied, and for the first time in years she felt beautiful. Winter came to Arizona territory, mild by Eastern standards but still cool enough for frost on some mornings. Pearl settled into life at the Triple P, learning to manage a ranch house and cook for a small crew of cowboys. She planted a winter garden that thrived under her care, providing fresh vegetables when most tables in the territory had only preserved foods. Elijah worked from dawn till dusk, driving himself and his men to prepare for spring calving. The rustlers had not returned, but everyone remained vigilant, especially after word came that neighboring ranches had suffered raids. In February, tragedy struck when a wildfire, sparked by lightning, threatened the western edge of their property. Elijah and his men fought the flames for 2 days straight, saving most of the grazing land but losing a section of fence and nearly losing the bunkhouse. When Elijah finally returned to the main house, he was exhausted beyond words, his face blackened with soot, his hands blistered from firefighting. "I thought I might lose you," Pearl said as she bathed his wounds. "Not a chance," Elijah replied with a tired smile. "Got too much to live for." By March, Pearl began to suspect she was with child, though she dared not hope too strongly. The doctor had been so certain. But when her courses failed to appear for the 3rd month in a row and morning sickness plagued her daily, she could no longer deny the possibility. "Elijah," she said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, I think I'm going to have a baby." Elijah's expression transformed from surprise to joy in an instant. He dropped to his knees before her, placing his hands reverently on her still flat stomach. "Are you sure?" Pearl nodded, her own joy tempered with fear. "The doctor in Pennsylvania said it wasn't likely after the smallpox, but yes, I'm sure." Elijah let out a whoop loud enough to startle the chickens in the nearby coop. He gathered Pearl in his arms, lifting her and spinning her around until she laughingly protested. "Be careful with me," she said. "I'm carrying precious cargo." Elijah set her down gently, his face serious again. "Pearl Parker, you are the most amazing woman I have ever known. This child is the luckiest soul on earth to have you for a mother." The pregnancy proceeded without complications, though the summer heat was brutal on Pearl as her body swelled with new life. Elijah hired a young woman from town, Sarah, to help with the household chores, insisting that Pearl rest as much as possible. In late October, just after their first wedding anniversary, Pearl went into labor. The nearest doctor was in Prescott, 2 days' ride away, so Widow Jenkins came to attend the birth, along with Sarah and the wife of Elijah's foreman. The labor was long and difficult, lasting from sunset to sunrise the following day. Elijah paced the porch, occasionally pressing his ear to the bedroom door, driven nearly mad by Pearl's cries of pain. Finally, as the first light of dawn broke over the desert, a new cry joined Pearl's, the lusty wail of a healthy baby. Widow Jenkins emerged, her apron stained but her face beaming. "Congratulations, Mr. Parker. You have a son." Elijah entered the bedroom to find Pearl pale and exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle against her breast. "Meet your son," she whispered. "Ethan William Parker." Elijah sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the small, red face. "He's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He is, isn't he?" Pearl gazed down at their child, marveling at his unblemished skin, his tiny fingers and toes, all perfect and whole. "Just like his mother," Elijah added, leaning over to kiss Pearl's forehead. "Hardly," Pearl laughed weakly, "but he's healthy and that's all that matters." Elijah's expression grew serious. "Pearl, do you know what today is?" she thought for a moment. "October 23rd. It's 1 year to the day since I first kissed every one of your scars and told you they were stories," he said softly. "And now those stories have a new chapter." He touched the baby's cheek gently. "This little miracle is proof that those scars are badges of honor, not something to hide." Pearl's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I could be this happy." "You deserve every happiness," Elijah said, "and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." Spring 1880 brought new beginnings to the Triple P. The ranch had prospered under Elijah's management, growing from 30 head of cattle to over 100. Pearl had recovered well from childbirth, and little Ethan was thriving, a chubby, cheerful baby who was the delight of everyone on the ranch. One warm April morning, Pearl was hanging laundry while Ethan played on a blanket nearby when she spotted riders approaching. She shaded her eyes against the sun, relief washing over her when she recognized Elijah at the head of the group. "We've got company," Elijah called as he dismounted. Behind him were 2 wagons filled with furniture and supplies, accompanied by a family, a man, woman, and 3 children. "This is Thomas Reed and his family," Elijah explained. "They lost their farm in California. I've hired Thomas as our new foreman. Daniel's moving on to try his luck in the silver mines." Pearl welcomed the newcomers, noting the exhaustion in Mrs. Reed's eyes and the wary expressions of the children. "You must be tired from your journey. Come inside and rest. I'll prepare some food." Over the next few weeks, the Reeds settled into the renovated bunkhouse, which Elijah had expanded to accommodate a family. Thomas proved to be an excellent foreman, with a natural understanding of cattle and a willingness to work from sunup to sundown. His wife, Martha, became Pearl's first real friend since coming to Arizona. Martha was a practical, no-nonsense woman who had weathered her own hardships without losing her sense of humor. "Lord, but it's good to have another woman to talk to," Martha confided as they worked together in Pearl's garden. "Men are fine creatures, but they don't understand half of what we go through." Pearl smiled, thinking of Elijah. "Some try harder than others." Martha glanced at Pearl's scarred face, then looked away quickly, but not before Pearl caught the look. "You can ask," Pearl said quietly. "About my face. Everyone wonders." Martha's cheeks reddened. "I didn't mean to stare. It's just, well, my sister had the pox when she was young." "Not as bad, but I know what it is." "Smallpox," Pearl confirmed. "When I was 20, nearly died." "You're a survivor, then?" Martha nodded approvingly. "Like me. Lost 2 babies before they were born, nearly lost my Thomas to a mining accident. Still standing, though." From that day on, their friendship deepened. Pearl found in Martha someone who understood suffering but refused to be defined by it, much like Elijah had taught her to view herself. Summer brought roundup time, with all hands working from dawn till dusk to brand the new calves and prepare the herd for market. Elijah spent long days in the saddle, coming home exhausted but satisfied with the ranch's progress. "We'll clear enough this year to add that second pasture," he told Pearl one night as they lay in bed, Ethan sleeping soundly in his cradle nearby. Maybe even start building that bigger house next spring. Pearl curled against his side. This house has served us well enough. It has, Elijah agreed, stroking her hair. But I promised you a real home, one with room for more children and maybe even a proper parlor for entertaining. More children. Pearl raised herself on one elbow to look at him. You want more, don't you? Ethan should have brothers and sisters. Pearl smiled, thinking of the secret she'd been keeping until she was certain. Well, then you'll be pleased to know that Ethan will have a sibling sometime next February. Elijah sat up, fully awake now. Pearl, are you sure? She nodded, laughing as he pulled her into his arms. Quite sure. I've been certain for about 3 weeks now. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I wanted to be absolutely sure, and I wanted the right moment. Elijah kissed her deeply. This is definitely the right moment. As autumn approached, news reached Wickenburg of unrest in the territory. A group calling themselves the Wickenburg Regulators had formed, ostensibly to protect ranchers from rustlers, but in reality taking the law into their own hands with increasing violence. They lynched a man over in Yavapai County, Thomas reported grimly one evening. Claimed he was stealing cattle, but word is he was just a Mexican farmer who disputed a property line. Elijah's face darkened. I want no part of vigilante justice. We'll protect what's ours according to the law. But the regulators were not easily ignored. In late September, 3 men rode up to the Triple P during dinner. Elijah met them on the porch, his hand resting casually near the revolver on his hip. Evening, gentlemen, he said coolly. What can I do for you? The leader, a hard-faced man named Garrett, dismounted. We're recruiting for the regulators. Every honest rancher needs to stand together against the thieves and outlaws. I appreciate the offer, Elijah replied, but I'll defend my property my own way. Garrett's expression hardened. That's not how it works, Parker. Either you're with us or you're against us, and those against us tend to find themselves having accidents. Elijah's hand moved to his gun. That sounds like a threat, Garrett. I don't take kindly to threats on my property. From inside, Pearl watched anxiously. Ethan clutched to her chest. Thomas appeared at her side, rifle in hand. Want me to go out there, Mrs. Parker? No, Pearl said firmly. Elijah can handle this, but be ready. Outside, the standoff continued until Garrett finally spat on the ground. Think about it, Parker. We'll be back for your answer in a week. As the riders departed, Elijah remained on the porch until they were out of sight, then came inside, his face grim. We may have trouble, he told Thomas and Pearl. Double the guard on the herd tonight and make sure everyone is armed. That night, as they lay in bed, Pearl voiced her fears. What will you do when they come back? Elijah sighed heavily. I won't join them. What they're doing is wrong, Pearl. It's murder dressed up as justice. But if you refuse, then we'll deal with whatever comes. He drew her closer. I didn't build this ranch by bowing to bullies, and I won't start now. The week passed with agonizing slowness. Elijah sent a message to the territorial marshal, but there was no response. Every day, the men took turns standing watch, and every night, Pearl slept fitfully, waking at the slightest sound. On the 7th day, just after noon, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced riders approaching far more than 3 this time. Get inside, Elijah ordered Pearl, who had been helping to repair a chicken coop. Take Ethan and stay away from the windows. Pearl obeyed, gathering their son and retreating to the house where Martha was already waiting with her children. Through a small gap in the curtains, Pearl watched as at least a dozen mounted men approached the ranch house. Elijah and his men, 5 in total, including Thomas, stood their ground in front of the house. Outnumbered but determined, Garrett rode forward. Time's up, Parker. What's your answer? Same as before, Elijah replied loudly enough for Pearl to hear. "I won't be part of a lynch mob calling itself justice." "That's unfortunate." Garrett signaled, and his men spread out, surrounding the ranch house. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. One of Garrett's men raised a rifle, but before he could fire, Thomas shot him from the hip. The man toppled from his horse, and all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Pearl clutched Ethan to her chest, his cries drowned out by the deafening roar of weapons. Martha pulled her down to the floor, shielding her own children with her body. Through the window, Pearl caught glimpses of the battle, Elijah firing methodically, taking cover behind a water trough, Thomas reloading his rifle behind a wagon, one of their hands falling, clutching his chest. The gunfight lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, an eerie silence fell over the ranch. Pearl handed Ethan to Martha and crept to the window, heart pounding. The yard was littered with bodies. 3 of Garrett's men lay motionless. One of the Triple P hands was down as well. The remaining regulators were retreating, carrying their wounded. And Elijah Pearl's breath caught. Elijah was still standing, though he was leaning heavily against the porch post, his left arm hanging limp at his side. Pearl ran outside, heedless of any remaining danger. "Elijah," he turned at her voice, his face pale but his eyes alert. "I'm all right," he gasped as she reached him. "Bullet went clean through. Thomas got hit too, but not bad." The aftermath of the shootout brought unexpected changes to Wickenburg. The territorial marshal finally arrived, investigating the incident and arresting several of the surviving regulators for attempted murder. Garrett had been among those killed in the firefight, eliminating the group's leadership. Elijah's wound healed slowly but completely, leaving him with a scar and occasional stiffness in cold weather. By Christmas, life at the Triple P had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though everyone remained vigilant. "We were lucky," Elijah told Pearl one evening as they sat by the fire, watching Ethan play with wooden blocks on the rug. "Could have been much worse." Pearl rested her hand on her growing belly. "I was so afraid I'd lose you." "Not a chance." Elijah covered her hand with his. "I told you before, I've got too much to live for." February 1881 brought a bitter cold snap, and with it, Pearl's labor began. This time, the doctor from Prescott arrived in time, having been summoned 2 weeks earlier to stay at a neighboring ranch until needed. The birth was easier than Ethan's had been, and by midnight, Pearl held their daughter in her arms, Emma Rose Parker, named for both their mothers. "She's beautiful," Elijah whispered, staring in awe at the tiny pink face. "Looks just like you." Pearl smiled tiredly. "Poor child." "Don't," Elijah admonished gently. "Not even in jest. She's lucky to look like her mother, the strongest, most beautiful woman in Arizona Territory." Ethan, now 15 months old and walking steadily, was fascinated by his new sister. Under Pearl's watchful eye, he would pat Emma's head gently, saying "baby" over and over. Spring brought new growth to the Triple P. The herd had doubled again, and Elijah hired 3 more hands to help with the increased workload. Construction began on a new, larger house closer to the river, with 4 bedrooms, a proper parlor, and a kitchen twice the size of their current one. "You'll have room for all your preserves now," Elijah teased as he showed Pearl the plans. Her jams and pickles had become famous in Wickenburg, with the mercantile paying good prices to stock them. "And you'll have a proper office," Pearl replied, pointing to a room off the parlor. No more doing the books at the kitchen table. By summer, the new house was taking shape, its adobe walls rising steadily under the skilled hands of Mexican laborers hired from Prescott. Pearl visited the construction site daily, often bringing lunch for the workers, and making small adjustments to the design as needed. One hot July afternoon, as Pearl was returning from the building site with Ethan and Emma, she noticed a dust cloud approaching from the south, not the direction of Wickenburg. "Thomas," she called to the foreman who was repairing a corral nearby. "Riders coming." Thomas shaded his eyes, then reached for his rifle. "Get the children inside, Mrs. Parker. I don't recognize that approach." Pearl hurried to the house, her heart racing. The violence with the regulators had left her permanently wary of strangers. By the time Elijah rode in from checking the north pasture, the riders had arrived, 3 men and a woman, their clothes dusty from travel, their horses showing signs of hard riding. "State your business," Elijah called, hand on his revolver as he joined Thomas in front of the house. The leader, an older man with a silver-streaked beard, raised his hands peacefully. "Name's Jacob Wilson. We're looking for work and shelter. Heard the Triple P was a fair place." "Where from?" Thomas asked suspiciously. "New Mexico territory. Our ranch burned Apache raid." "Been traveling for weeks." Elijah studied them carefully. "The woman, my daughter Ruth. She's handy with horses." Pearl had emerged onto the porch, Emma in her arms and Ethan hiding behind her skirts. She saw the exhaustion in the travelers' faces, especially the young woman's. "Elijah," she said quietly, "they look half-starved." Elijah glanced at his wife, then back to the travelers. Slowly he lowered his gun. "We can offer a meal and water for your horses. After that we'll talk about work." Over supper that evening, Jacob Wilson told their story: a small horse ranch near the New Mexico border, destroyed in a territorial dispute with Apache warriors. His wife and younger son killed, the survivors fleeing west with only what they could carry. "Ruth's brothers went north to Colorado," he explained. "Mining work, but she wouldn't leave her old pa." Ruth, a quiet woman perhaps a few years younger than Pearl, kept her eyes on her plate. "Pa raised horses all his life. I couldn't let him give it up." Elijah considered. "We've been thinking about adding horses to our operation. Good cow ponies are always in demand. If you know your business, there might be a place for you here." Jacob's weathered face brightened. "We know horses, Mr. Parker. Been breeding and training them since before Ruth was born." "Then stay the night," Elijah said. "Tomorrow we'll see what you know." The Wilsons proved their worth quickly. Jacob's knowledge of horses was extensive, and Ruth had a natural way with even the most difficult animals. Within a month, they had established a small corral dedicated to the beginnings of the Triple P horse operation. Ruth remained reserved, speaking little except about horses. Pearl made efforts to befriend the young woman, inviting her to help with canning or to join her when she took the children to the river to play. Gradually, Ruth began to open up, sharing stories of her life in New Mexico and her dreams of someday breeding horses fine enough for racing. "My mother was half Mexican," she confided one afternoon as they watched Ethan splashing in the shallow water. "She taught me that horses respond to the spirit, not just the hand. You have to reach them here first." She touched her heart. Pearl nodded. "Like people in many ways." Ruth glanced at Pearl's scarred face, then quickly away. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stare." "It's all right," Pearl said gently. "I'm used to it." "Was it painful? The scars, I mean." Pearl considered the question. "The disease was excruciating. The scars themselves, not so much. But the way people looked at me afterward, that was its own kind of pain." Ruth nodded slowly. "I understand that in a way. Being half Mexican in New Mexico wasn't easy, even though there are many of us. Some people see only what they expect to see." "Exactly," Pearl agreed. "But the right people see beyond that." "Like Mr. Parker," Pearl smiled. "Like Elijah, yes. He saw me when I couldn't even see myself." By autumn, the The new house was completed, and the Triple P held a housewarming celebration that drew people from all over the territory. Even the territorial governor attended, having heard of Elijah's stand against the regulators and the ranch's growing reputation for fine cattle and, more recently, excellent horses. The party was held outdoors, with tables set up under cottonwood trees and lanterns hanging from branches. A local band played fiddle music, and a dance floor had been created by laying wooden planks on level ground. Pearl, wearing a new dress of deep blue silk that Elijah had ordered from San Francisco, moved among their guests with growing confidence. At 30, with 2 healthy children and a thriving ranch, she had come far from the scared, scarred woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Wickenburg 3 years earlier. "Mrs. Parker," the governor greeted her, bowing slightly. "Your husband tells me this magnificent spread is largely your doing," Pearl laughed. "My husband is generous with his praise, Governor. The Triple P is very much a joint effort. Nevertheless, it's an impressive achievement. You've built something remarkable here." As the evening progressed, Pearl found herself watching Ruth, who had drawn the attention of several young men from neighboring ranches. Dressed in a borrowed gown of pearls, with her dark hair arranged in an elegant style Martha had helped with, Ruth was surprisingly beautiful. "She's blooming," Elijah commented, coming to stand beside Pearl. "Like someone else I know." Pearl leaned against his shoulder. "It's amazing what a little security and acceptance can do for a person, speaking of which." Elijah guided her away from the party toward a quiet spot near the new house. "I have something for you." From his pocket he withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a gold locket, intricately engraved with roses. "Elijah, it's beautiful," Pearl breathed as he fastened it around her neck. "Open it," he urged. Inside were 2 tiny paintings, one of Ethan, one of Emma, both rendered with surprising skill. "How did you commission an artist in Prescott?" Elijah explained. "Had him work from descriptions and that photograph we had taken last spring." Pearl touched the locket, tears welling in her eyes. "It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received." "There's an inscription on the back," Elijah said softly. Pearl turned the locket over. Engraved in delicate script were the words, "Every scar tells a story of strength." "Oh, Elijah." Pearl's voice broke as emotion overwhelmed her. He drew her into his arms. "I meant what I said that first time, Pearl. Your scars are badges of honor. They tell the story of a woman who faced death and came out stronger. Every day, I thank God for bringing you into my life." Pearl looked up at him, no longer hiding her face or her feelings. "And every day, I thank him for giving me the courage to show you my scars." They rejoined the party hand in hand, moving easily among their guests. When the band struck up a waltz, Elijah led Pearl onto the dance floor, holding her proudly before the assembled crowd. As they danced beneath the stars, Pearl caught glimpses of their life around them, Ethan sleeping peacefully in Martha's lap, Emma being cooed over by admiring ladies, Ruth laughing at something Thomas's eldest son had said, Jacob deep in conversation with the governor about horse breeding. "We've built something good here," Pearl murmured against Elijah's shoulder. "We have," he agreed, "and we're just getting started." By 1885, the Triple P had become one of the most prosperous ranches in Arizona Territory. The cattle operation had expanded to over 500 head, and the horse breeding program, under Jacob and Ruth's expert guidance, was producing some of the finest cow ponies and racehorses in the West. The Parker family had grown as well. After Emma came James, born in 1882, and then, to everyone's surprise, twins Michael and Margaret in 1884. The big house was filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the organized chaos that Pearl managed with remarkable skill. Wickenburg itself had grown from a rough mining town to a respectable community with 2 churches, a proper school, and even a small hospital. Pearl, as wife of one of the area's most successful ranchers, had become a leading figure in town society, helping to establish a library and organizing fundraisers for the school. Her scars, once a source of such shame, were now barely noticed by those who knew her. Newcomers might stare briefly, but Pearl's confidence and gracious manner quickly overshadowed any physical imperfections. Elijah, at 37, had matured into a man of substance and influence. He served on the territorial council, advocating for ranchers' rights and improved infrastructure. His advice was sought by new settlers, and his support could make or break local political campaigns. But despite their success, the Parkers never forgot their humble beginnings. They remained generous employers and neighbors, offering help to those in need and opportunities to those willing to work hard. On a warm spring afternoon in 1885, as Pearl sat on the porch mending a tear in one of James's shirts, she spotted Elijah riding in with their eldest, now 6-year-old Ethan, seated proudly in front of him on the saddle. "Mama, look," Ethan called excitedly as they approached. "I rode all the way from the south pasture," Pearl set aside her sewing. "Did you now? That's quite an accomplishment." Elijah lifted the boy down, ruffling his blonde hair. "He's a natural, just like his mother." "Hardly," Pearl laughed. "I was terrified of horses until you taught me to ride." "And now you outride half the men in the territory," Elijah said proudly. "Speaking of which, Ruth mentioned you might enter Starlight in the Prescott race next month." Pearl nodded. "If you've no objections. She's the fastest mare we've bred and Ruth says she's ready." "No objections at all." The governor himself asked if we'd be entering any horses. Seems he's placed a substantial wager on Triple P stock. That evening, after the children were asleep, Pearl and Elijah sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the desert sky. The years of hard work had left their marks on both of them. Elijah's hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and lines fanned from the corners of his eyes. Pearl's hands were roughened from years of ranch work, and she had her own share of smile lines. "I got a letter from my brother today," Elijah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "He's finally coming to visit, bringing his wife and their boys." Pearl straightened. "After all these years, what changed his mind?" "Says he's curious about the brother who made good in the savage West." Elijah chuckled. "I think he's more interested in the fact that the Triple P is now worth more than the family ranch in Texas ever was. Will it be strange seeing him again? It's been, what, 15 years? 17, Elijah corrected. "And yes, it will be strange, but I'm glad for it." Family is family after all. Pearl rested her head on his shoulder. "When will they arrive?" "Mid-June, according to his letter. They'll stay for 2 weeks. "We'll make them welcome," Pearl promised, though a flutter of anxiety stirred in her chest. Would Elijah's family accept her, scars and all? As if reading her thoughts, Elijah took her hand. "Robert will love you because I love you, and if he doesn't, then he can ride right back to Texas." June brought scorching heat, and with it, the arrival of Robert Parker, his wife Beatrice, and their sons William and John. Robert was the image of Elijah, but harder somehow, with none of his younger brother's warmth in his eyes. Beatrice was a handsome woman with impeccable manners that seemed better suited to a Boston drawing room than an Arizona ranch. She blanched visibly upon first meeting Pearl, though she quickly composed herself. "My dear," she said, taking Pearl's hand. "How delightful to finally meet you. Elijah's letters have told us so much about your courage." Pearl recognized the barely concealed pity and met it with dignity. "The pleasure is ours, Beatrice. I hope you'll find the Triple P comfortable, though I'm sure it's quite different from your home in Texas." The boys, 13 and 11, were more forthright. William, the elder, stared openly at Pearl's face before his mother sharply cleared her throat. John, more sensitive, simply offered a shy smile and a polite greeting. That first dinner was a strained affair, with conversation revolving safely around cattle prices, weather patterns, and the children's education. Robert was clearly impressed by the ranch's prosperity, though reluctant to show it. "You've done well for yourself, little brother," he finally acknowledged over after-dinner brandy. "Never thought you'd amount to much when you left Texas." "I had motivation," Elijah replied evenly, "and I had Pearl." Robert's eyes slid to Pearl, then away. "Yes, well, a man needs a helpmate." The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Elijah showed Robert the ranch operations, pride evident in every explanation. The women maintained a cordial if distant relationship, with Beatrice clearly uncomfortable around Pearl's scarred face but too well-bred to show it openly. The children, as children often do, bridged the gap more easily. William and John were fascinated by their cousins and by the freedom of ranch life. They spent their days learning to ride Western style, helping with chores and exploring the property under Ethan's enthusiastic guidance. A week into their visit, Pearl overheard a conversation between Robert and Elijah as they returned from inspecting the horse breeding operation. "I don't understand it, Elijah," Robert was saying. "You could have had any woman. Why choose one so marked?" Pearl froze in the hallway, her heart pounding. "Because she's worth 10 of any other woman I've ever met," Elijah replied, his voice tight with anger. "Her scars are badges of honor, Robert, not something to be ashamed of." "But surely you must sometimes wish—" "No," Elijah interrupted firmly. "I have never, not once, wished Pearl any different than she is. Those scars are part of what made her the strong, compassionate woman I love. And if you can't see beyond them to the extraordinary person she is, then that's your loss, brother, not mine." Tears welled in Pearl's eyes as she silently retreated to the kitchen, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. Elijah's defense of her was nothing new. He had been her champion from the beginning, but hearing him stand up to his brother stirred emotions. She thought long resolved. That evening, after everyone had retired, Pearl found Elijah on the porch, smoking his pipe and staring at the stars. "I heard what you said to Robert today," she said quietly, joining him on the swing. Elijah sighed. "I'm sorry you had to hear that. Robert always was a narrow-minded fool." "It doesn't matter," Pearl assured him, taking his hand. "What matters is what you said. Even after all these years, you still see me that way." "What way?" "As worth something. As beautiful, despite everything." Elijah set his pipe aside and turned to face her fully. "Pearl Parker, when are you going to believe that I see you more clearly than anyone else ever has? Those scars are just one chapter in the story of you, a story I'm privileged to be part of." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the familiar patterns of her scars with tenderness. "Every morning, I wake up grateful for the life we've built together. Every scar on your face reminds me of how strong you are, how much you've overcome." Pearl leaned into his touch. "Even with 5 children and a ranch to run, even when I'm cross and tired and old." "Especially then," Elijah laughed softly. "Because that's when I see most clearly the woman who faced down death and refused to let it define her life." He kissed her then, as he had thousands of times before, with reverence and passion that had only deepened with the years. "I love you, Elijah Parker," Pearl whispered against his lips, "scars and all." "And I love you, Pearl Parker," he replied, "stories and all." The Parkers' visit ended without any great breakthrough between the brothers, but with a certain mutual respect established. Robert could not fail to be impressed by what Elijah had built, and even Beatrice had warmed somewhat to Pearl, particularly after witnessing her skillful management of the household and her obvious devotion to her children. As their carriage pulled away, Elijah put his arm around Pearl's shoulders. "Well, that's done. 17 years was long enough to wait, I suppose," Pearl leaned into him. "Family is complicated. That it is. But this family we've made together is just right." The years flowed on like the Hasseampa River, sometimes rushing with events, sometimes meandering peacefully through seasons marked by cattle drives, harvests, births, and occasional sorrows. Ruth Wilson married Thomas's eldest son in 1886, combining her horse expertise with his cattle knowledge to eventually establish their own small ranch adjacent to the Triple P. Jacob lived to see his first great-grandchild before passing peacefully in 1895, leaving behind a horse breeding legacy that would continue for generations. The Parker children grew tall and strong, each finding their own path. Ethan followed his father into ranching, eventually taking over management of the Triple P's cattle operations. Emma, intelligent and determined like her mother, became one of the first female physicians in Arizona Territory after studying in San Francisco. James chose a different path entirely, pursuing law and eventually politics, serving in the territorial legislature, and later, after statehood in 1912, as one of Arizona's first state senators. The twins, Michael and Margaret, remained closest to home, Michael developing the Triple P's agricultural operations, and Margaret working alongside her mother in community development, helping to establish Wickenburg's first hospital. Through it all, Pearl and Elijah remained the center of this expanding universe, their partnership deepening with each passing year. The smallpox scars faded somewhat with age, becoming just another feature of Pearl's face, like the laugh lines around her eyes or the streak of silver that gradually replaced the auburn in her hair. In 1903, for their 25th wedding anniversary, the Parker children organized a celebration that brought friends and neighbors from across the territory. The Triple P, now encompassing over 10,000 acres with multiple operations, was decorated festively, with lanterns hanging from trees and tables groaning with food. As evening fell, Elijah led Pearl onto the same dance floor where they had waltzed at their housewarming so many years before. At 55, he still moved with grace, and at 53, Pearl followed his lead as naturally as breathing. 25 years, Elijah murmured as they danced. "Did you ever imagine that day by the river when you showed me your face that we'd be here now?" Pearl shook her head. "Never. I was so certain no one could ever love me. And I was so certain I'd never find someone worth loving," Elijah replied. "We were both wrong, and thank God for it." Later that night, in the privacy of their bedroom, the same master chamber they had moved into when the house was first built, though now the furniture was more worn, and the decorations more accumulated than planned, Elijah presented Pearl with an anniversary gift. It was a book, leather-bound and heavy. When Pearl opened it, she found photographs, letters, pressed flowers, and handwritten accounts, a chronicle of their life together. "I've been working on it for years," Elijah explained as she turned the pages with trembling fingers. Every important moment, every story. The final page held a recent photograph of them surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Beneath it, in Elijah's strong handwriting, were the words, "Every scar tells a story. Ours is the greatest story ever told." Pearl closed the book carefully, tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect, thank you." Elijah took her in his arms. "Thank you, my love, for every chapter, every page, every word of our story." As they held each other in the soft darkness, Pearl thought of the frightened, scarred young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach in Wickenburg a quarter-century before. How far she had come from hiding her face in shame to standing proudly as matriarch of one of the territory's most respected families. And it had begun with a cowboy who looked past her scars to see the stories they told, stories of survival, of strength, of a life worth living, and a love worth fighting for. The Triple P Ranch flourished well into the 20th century, a living testament to what Pearl and Elijah Parker had built together. Even after Elijah passed in 1919 at the age of 71, Pearl carried on, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren who knew the story of her scars and the cowboy who had kissed everyone. When Pearl herself departed this world in 1925, she left behind not only a prosperous enterprise and a loving family, but also a legacy that transcended physical appearance, a reminder that true beauty lies in resilience, in kindness, in loving and being loved completely, scars and all. The citizens of Wickenburg would remember her not as the scarred woman who had arrived so tentatively in their town nearly 50 years earlier, but as Pearl Parker, rancher, philanthropist, matriarch, survivor. A woman whose life story, written in the scars on her face and the love in her heart, had become part of the very fabric of the West itself.